Not only was it like sometimes in New York, you'd be like, oh, I'll spend 3 days in, Williamsburg, and then I'll go pet sit in the Upper West Side. But we also were like trying as much as possible to bike. So you're like, okay, I've got to pack everything I need for maybe a 2 week sit, right? And somehow strap it onto a city bike and haul across the bridge all the way over to somewhere. Yeah. So it definitely got exhausting. I was in really good shape though, as a result, I think of this. But yeah, after 4 years, whether it was like because New York City is a lot to like deal with as a work environment, but also the movement, we eventually switched to doing like month, 2 month pet sits, sometimes 6 months even.
Mm.
We switched to kind of aiming for longer pet sits, not in New York City. So that's when we started doing more like pet sitting around the country and eventually like internationally. And doing longer has made it more sustainable. Because if we had to keep moving every 3 days like we were initially, I would totally go nuts. Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. It's kind of quiet in my world right now, but how about for you?
Oh,
Things are almost over.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the main school year is getting to an end. We have like a month of school left, but more low key, nothing crazy. So it's been
Nice.
yeah, it's been spring. It's been fun.
Ah, that's so good. Are you at a stand-up desk?
I am. Yeah. I don't know if I ever showed you this.
Ah,
I can't really show.
nice.
I have a separate
I'm
camp.
glad you do that.
Yeah, I started
Okay.
doing that last summer actually. I just think it's been better, just standing up more. Like I think we spent too much time
Yeah.
down, but it feels good
Yeah.
going into that. Yeah.
You don't have like a little treadmill underneath or something, do you? Or
I have this treadmill here, but that's not mine. That's my roommate.
ah,
I'm using,
okay,
but
okay. Right. I see that occasionally people have like the stand-up desk and then like the walking treadmill, and I'm like, oh, that's such a cool setup.
well, I respect
So
the people who do that, especially now that we spend so much time using like Zoom calls and work online. It definitely like helps you to stay moving a little bit and be healthy. But
yeah. Yeah, totally, totally. Oh, well, hopefully everything's otherwise going really well, right, for you. And I appreciate you being like okay with me not doing the form because I was
that's
doing it.
okay.
I was like,
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure I'll just say these things
yeah. I
during the
mean,
call. So,
everyone kind of has
uh,
their own way of doing it. I think that a lot of people I do podcasts with don't end up filling it out, and it's totally fine because I think the only thing that helps me
okay.
is that sometimes I'm reading through it, like something catches my eye that I find really interesting. We go explore that, but other than that, I just love
Ah,
sitting down and just having a natural conversation. So I just play around with it like
yes.
a week's time, but that's just the
No, and it's good. It makes you think about like what's, like as a guest, I think you know what could happen, right? Which is really helpful. So I also understand like that value too. So, but yeah, you tell me what I should do. Hopefully this looks
oh
okay
yeah,
and it
that's good.
sounds okay.
There's
And
honestly
I don't know.
there's no rules. It's just sit back, have a
Okay.
conversation, just keep it chill, nothing serious.
Okay.
For sure.
Cool. Cool. Blurred background's fine. Otherwise, it's
Either way,
just a computer. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. So just let me know how we start.
Let's get started right now, just have a conversation. So you're still on the West Coast right now, right?
Oh, I'm actually in New York. I've
Oh,
been in New
okay.
York the last month, so that's part of my funny stuff to talk about, right? Is that I move around a lot.
Are you
So,
still moving around a lot, like in terms of like staying in the different places? So tell me about that.
yeah, so the last 9 years, my husband and I have been like pet sitting and living in other people's homes while they're away. So that's why I'm always in a different location with a different background, which is very funny for my students with different animals as well. So yeah, so in New York now, and then before, like when we started, we spent the first 4 years that we were together just bouncing around apartments, mostly in Manhattan, which was pretty neat. Like it's nice to live in Manhattan and not pay rent or utilities. And my job is very flexible, as you know, just doing kind of remote college admissions consulting. And yeah, it's just a nice way I feel like to like experience how other people live. And it's good too for us because we've never really found a place yet that we want to settle down. So like the variety is nice, like it's nice that when other things are more routine, like at least the location can change and the cultures and everything else. So yeah, so in New York till tomorrow and then going to Philadelphia
Nice.
for 8 days, and then going back to New York for 6, and then going to Seattle for 2 weeks, and then Japan for 2.5 months, and then Ohio for a week. Anyway, it's like I try to plan like a year in advance of locations with the goal this year of spending winter in Florida. Because I have like retirement head already in the sense that like I want to be a snowbird. Like I want to spend my winter somewhere warm and then my summer somewhere like where it's a bit colder. So that's kind of the goals for now.
Makes sense. So what was the original thinking that went into the lifestyle that you've decided to commit to? Like I know that at one point when I was reading the article, there was a sense of like saving a lot of money for I think it was a house or you just like
Yeah.
enjoy the lifestyle of moving around from place to place or like what was the original like goal in mind?
Yeah, so there's never an intention. I feel like a lot of my stuff is unintentional. I had at the time when we were starting, right before that, I had bought a condo in Hoboken with a boyfriend who a month later we broke up. And he was like, I'm out. So I was left with a mortgage, on my own when I had expected to only pay half. So I was like, oh no, I need a second job. So I started dog walking. And then, like, within just a couple of months, the folks that I dog walk for were asking me to pet sit. And I built up enough pet sit clients very rapidly to the point where I was like, I don't need this apartment. I can just rent it out, let someone else pay my mortgage, have it be like more of an investment and just move around. And I like the variety. Like it wasn't, I feel like now I'm kind of used to it, but like when I first started, when you go into someone's house, it's like you're like, oh, let me like look in the refrigerator and the cupboards and like the medicine cabinet. You're like, ooh, there's like a new face wash to try. All of this stuff was like very exciting. So like I think that was kind of the initial draw is it just like added some excitement to life. And I mean, like for sure, like saving money was great too. Like I'm someone that's always been interested in real estate. So what ended up happening is like eventually I met my husband who was living in his office at the time. So we both had these very weird housing situations that I think we both admired in each other. So we eventually combined and he ended up just pet sitting with me. And we ended up like booking enough pet sits nonstop that we like pretty much didn't have gaps. And when we did have overlaps, we created a pet sitting company. So by the time we were maybe like a year or two in, we had sometimes like, I don't know, 8 pet sits going on at once, like especially over the holidays, it might be more. So yeah, it ended up becoming like this weird part-time business. And then the money that we saved from like not paying, New York City rent, right, which is a lot, and utilities, we ended up taking, well, I sold, which is weird, my condo back to my ex later because he was like, oh, it's a good investment, actually. I should. And we took the money from that and then purchased our first house in Jersey City. And then eventually, for more savings, purchased 3 more properties in Jersey City. So they became kind of like a retirement nest egg situation. So yeah, it's interesting. I didn't want this to happen necessarily, but it worked out very well. And it also worked out financially, which is very nice.
So that's interesting. People would let you stay in your house like overnight as well while you're doing the pet sitting. Like they were fine with that. Like a lot of majority of people were like,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So there are websites where you can find people that are looking for pet sitters. I feel in New York City, especially, there are a lot of pet owners that travel a bunch. So I even had some pet owners that were like, you have a meeting, you get to know them, but you do get a review system as well, so they can know you're not like a crazy person that's gonna, destroy their home. So I would say some of it came from those, and then some of it there's also trust built in because I also back then used to be a kindergarten admissions tutor where I was tutoring 3-year-olds to take the kindergarten admissions exam, which is weird, but that's what we do in New York City.
yeah.
So I had a lot of my families from that when they found out I love animals would just have me stay over, and a lot of those families traveled a lot too. So, we kind of had like a steady roster, and it was neat. Like one of the apartments we stayed in was like an $18 million Tribeca, like full floor apartment essentially. So you got to see some pretty strange places, and it was it was a little weird sometimes when you're like, I work for this person and I'm living in their house, but it worked out. There were a few weird things that happened, but it mostly worked out.
Were there ever nights or occasional nights or like nights in a row where you did not have a place to stay?
Occasionally, yeah. I mean, the great thing is like we have very generous friends and relatives that would like on those occasions let us stay with them. Sandy's got a great aunt in the Upper East Side in particular that like pretty much has like almost all of a brownstone, so has like guests regularly stay with her. So yeah, so we got to be house guests a lot, which is kind of weird, to be like 30 and be like, "Yep, I'm couch crashing tonight," but it's fine. It's fine. It's worth it for the long game, I guess.
Did it ever get too much? Like you're just tired of like moving and staying in different places? Because I know that although it can be exciting to live in different places, I know that it's kind of be
Yeah.
overwhelming, like moving all your stuff, like taking everything from place to place. Did it ever get to a point where it's just really over?
Yeah. It is. What made it harder is that we're both like environmentalists. So not only was it like sometimes in New York, you'd be like, oh, I'll spend 3 days in, Williamsburg, and then I'll go pet sit in the Upper West Side. But we also were like trying as much as possible to bike. So you're like, okay, I've got to pack everything I need for maybe a 2 week sit, right? And somehow strap it onto a city bike and haul across the bridge all the way over to somewhere. Yeah. So it definitely got exhausting. I was in really good shape though, as a result, I think of this. But yeah, after 4 years, whether it was like because New York City is a lot to like deal with as a work environment, but also the movement, we eventually switched to doing like month, 2 month pet sits, sometimes 6 months even. We switched to kind of aiming for longer pet sits, not in New York City. So that's when we started doing more like pet sitting around the country and eventually like internationally. And doing longer has made it more sustainable. Because if we had to keep moving every 3 days like we were initially, I would totally go nuts. So, yes. And there
Have
are
you
plenty of times too where it's like, just like mentally, you're like, you wake up sometimes in a bed and you like go, you try to get out in the wrong direction because you still think you're at the house you were before. You just kind of have like natural reactions, or you start opening drawers thinking the utensils are there and you're like, oh wait, I'm somewhere new. So yeah, so it's mentally strange sometimes. Yeah.
have you always had that adventurous nature to you, like even from when you were young?
Definitely not. No. I mean, I grew up like, like a welfare child, latchkey kid. So we didn't travel much, like I mostly just knew Pennsylvania and my suburbs. So yeah, I feel like once you move to New York City, you're kind of engulfed with all this like multiculturalism and people with resources to travel that it like kind of just becomes part of you, right? You start to aspire more to it. So yeah, it definitely has developed more because of the pet sitting.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the most like interesting stories from your times like moving from place to place? Like what comes to mind?
Hmm. Well, we did do a pet sit in Japan that was pretty neat at a cat shelter. And it was really strange at first because it was in Fukushima, which is like where the earthquake happened and like the nuclear reactors, they had, of course, the damage from that. And it was weird because the way their shelter worked was like basically this shelter rescued all of the cats that had been abandoned when families evacuated Fukushima. But like, we were going there some year, I forget how much time had passed, but some years, to the point where like around Fukushima, there were Geiger counters everywhere that would tell you about the radiation levels. So it was interesting, like constantly seeing these Geiger counters, but like at the same time also, it was like a house that had maybe like 5 or 6 rooms, and each room had like 5 or 6 cats in there. So the pets that was like you would spend time, you'd like rotate like an hour here, an hour here, and just like hang out with like 20 plus cats and a couple of rescue dogs. So that one was strange, but really fun. And like, I'm glad I could like support what they were doing there because those cats needed homes and like the goal is eventually they'd all be adopted, all of that. So that was a weird one. Being in Israel last summer was kind of strange too, because of, there's kind of like the, I guess, underpinnings of what's happening now, with like missile launches. So, speaking to people in Israel, they weren't concerned at all, but a lot of my family here was like, oh my gosh, it's dangerous, don't go. And I was like, yeah, I've got lots of Jewish friends. They swear Israel is amazing. I wanted to see that. So that was interesting too. Like every apartment has a bomb shelter pretty much in Israel. So it was interesting going in there and just being like, that pantry's a bomb shelter. All right. So definitely haven't seen that before. I don't know. There's been a lot of kind of, yeah, like interesting locations. Pet wise, nothing interesting, really. We've kind of just had cats, dogs. Bainbridge Island, which is an island off of Seattle, we had sheep, and they were sheep that had recently given birth. So we got to see the younglings grow up, the lambs, and that was really neat. So they had a bunch of sheep and goats and anyway, and chickens. They had maybe like 30 chickens and ducks. So every morning you have to like get out the feed, and like throw it out. Anyway, so I'd say I want more weird animals. I've seen advertised like great African snails, which are supposed to be like massive, that I would love to pet sit for, but it hasn't worked out yet. But it's a goal of mine to pet sit for great African snails. So
Amazing.
yeah, anyway, that's kind of a spread of a couple of interesting things.
Well, I always thought that people are just kind of people in terms of like the way they act, the behaviors they have, like the attitudes, that people are just the same wherever you go. But I think the more and more of like visiting new places and met different kinds of people, I realized that literally everywhere you go, like people act in a totally different way. And one of the examples I can think about is that we have a lot of Canadians who came to Petty last year who are all playing football here. And a
Uh,
lot of them just mentioned how they noticed the culture back at home and the culture here is just so different, even in just terms of manners and politeness. Like they say that it's surprising to them that anyone could ever hold the door for someone and not get a thank you. And to them, that was shocking. And they often, I see them use words like calling people man, calling people sir, using words like pardon. And even recently, when I've traveled around, like even the US, like nearby areas, like when I went to New Hampshire last summer, we went to Virginia last November. I noticed that wherever you go, like even if it's 2 or 3 hours from your house, like people can be so, so different. So have you seen that also, as considering you visited so many different places?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so interesting. I'm glad you're picking up on that. And it's fun hearing that from Canadians. Like we've definitely done some pet sitting in Canada as well. And Canadians are just lovely, right? How nice and polite are they? And not even overly polite, right? Just kind
Yeah.
of it's part of their nature, and very friendly and welcoming. Like a good example is in Nova Scotia, one of the first trips we took, we ended up like because we didn't have a car at the time, we ended up just hitchhiking a bunch in Nova Scotia, which like is great. People pick you up and they're so like lovely and they ask you lots of questions and they're enchanting and they have great accents and all of these things. But in the US, I think most parts of the US, if you tried to hitchhike, people would think you were out of your mind, right? So I totally kind of respond to what you were saying with the Canadians, but I agree. There's like so much culture. Like we spent the last year a lot of our time in the Pacific Northwest, and it's just a lot more like chill there, like everyone, not everyone, a good chunk of people kind of dress like, like they're ready to go hiking, which is like my style for sure. I'm like, oh, cool. I could just wear my Columbia like khakis every day. Wonderful. Versus right in New York, everyone dresses like they're just dressed to the T. Everyone has a style. It's very distinct. People really are thoughtful about what they're doing. When I come to New York, I have like my New York clothing that I pull out of storage because like I can't get away with what I'm wearing sometimes in the Pacific Northwest. Or I'm from the Philadelphia area. So when I go back to Philly, it's like amazing how many people you just see like chilling in their sweats all day. And especially coming from New York, you're like, that doesn't really happen a ton. So I don't know. I pay attention a lot to clothing. Um, but yeah, for sure, demeanor wise, I'd say there's a big difference between West and East Coast. Going to Japan, Japan is just lovely as a culture. They're so polite there. And I know a lot of people are like, ah, it's just surface level politeness, right? There's judgment happening. But I'm still like, I still enjoy it. I still like enjoy the politeness, even if there's something underneath it. But I understand like New Yorkers can be seen as kind of gruff, but lots of people appreciate how honest they are, right? So I think stereotypes are weird, but a lot of them I'm like, yep, I understand why that's a stereotype, right? In terms of at least like regional attitudes. So yeah, interesting question.
Tell me more about the hitchhiking in Nova Scotia. That sounds interesting.
Oh yeah, so um, this is weird. But when my husband and I first met, we gave each other books to read, and he gave me a book, I forget what it was called, but it was about like this family in Nova Scotia that like lived on a rock island essentially. And like I think the shipping news was also kind of similar to it. Or Rockland, maybe it was called, I don't remember, but essentially it was kind of about like these like sailors, right? Nova Scotia has a lot of like kind of like these burlier, outdoorsy, just like really strong, stalwart folks, And I think we were both kind of enchanted by like the nature of these people. So it was a weird thing, but he happened to know someone that lived on one of these islands referenced in the book. So lo and behold, we ended up going out there to spend a week with them and see like what the island was like and actually live out the book a little bit, which is strange but lucky. And then we did a bunch of workaways as well. So workaways are an opportunity where in order to stay for free and sometimes have meals included in someone's place, you exchange some hours of service. So we were in Digby Island for a little bit, digging out a former church's basement to turn it into a pub. That was strange. We were on another island that was secluded, basically like trying to find a bunch of eggs before their dog did, which is another weird workaway. These people were kind of out there. Anyway, so we had a whole bunch of workaway spots and like the Rock Island picked out for maybe like a 3 week span, 4 week span. But yeah, we decided, no better place than Nova Scotia, where everyone's so friendly just to kind of like put your thumb out. Sometimes it took a little longer. I'd say like max is like 30 minutes, but sometimes you'd be out hitchhiking and be like 5 minutes and you'd be picked up and like, you'd have a nice little chat, meet some people. So uh, a weird thing too is that while we were out there, we saw this guy biking with panniers. So panniers are like these little sacks that are on the side of the bike. And they're like there's so many on there. It looked like super heavy. I don't know how he was riding his bike. It was loaded. And we were talking to him, and it turned out he was biking across Canada and
Oh,
then down through America to Florida. Yeah.
what?
And yeah, he's just incredible. And like he was doing it like without homes essentially. Like he was just like sleeping in like dugouts of baseball fields or like, yeah, anyway. He was very rugged, a little bit younger, maybe like 20s,
By himself?
and by himself. Yeah. He's done this a bunch too. It's just the person he is. He actually ended up biking, I think, to South America after Florida and then back up. Um, Anyway, we chatted with him for 30 minutes and I was like, hey, if you ever need a place to stay, we just bought this house. Let us know when you get to New York. And then he got in contact with us and then ended up staying with us for like 3 months,
Oh,
and I know. So it's cool. Sometimes I feel like hitchhiking and like meeting other travelers is great because you both have that adventurous nature, right? And you link up and like things can happen because you're willing to do something a little risky and like stay with a stranger, So yeah, he's become like one of our closest friends as a result, and that never wouldn't it wouldn't have happened if we didn't hitchhike. So I'm
amazing.
grateful for it.
Um,
Yeah.
so when you were hitchhiking in Nova Scotia, like where were you staying at the time? Like were you like exploring and going to different places, or were you just kind of staying in like one spot where you're, I think, working at
Yeah.
church? So
Yeah, so every place, like it was like almost like a week at a time in different places.
okay.
But yeah, basically staying in the workaways. So the first one had like a really old house that was turned into a B and B, and we stayed in a room. The second had a farmhouse essentially, where like there was just kind of like an attic space that we stayed in. That was very rustic. And then the Rock Island people had a house. We just stayed in a guest bedroom. But yeah, you're like just, virtually strangers, essentially, other than you've like, talked to them via email or maybe on a Zoom call. And you just kind of show up with your bags and you're like, okay, where are we sleeping? But it's fun. I think I recommend it. It's like a great way to like learn to be more humble, because you never know what your sleeping situation is going to be. So,
I think a lot of people who maybe want to go and do more exploring, go and do exploring, and like hitchhiking, for example, they're often like held back of the fear of safety and like things going wrong. So, what would you advise to people who might want to go out and do it but are kind of afraid of how it's going to go down?
yeah, I think I mean, you should be cautious for sure, right? Like there are people out there with nefarious intent, so definitely be cautious. I recommend doing it with someone as well. Try not to do it on your own. I think the fact that there were two of us, was very handy. And we both had experience hitchhiking, so hopefully do it with someone that's done it before. Otherwise, I think it will just like make you really anxious, right? Like, I think we both kind of had like that solidarity and do it somewhere, of course, that feels safe, that like you feel has the right community for it. Like Japan, I'd feel safe there, like crime is super low. Same with Nova Scotia, right? Like it's really not so much of an issue. It's part of the culture a little bit. Um, versus like would I hitchhike in New York City? Like, no, I probably wouldn't do that. I think kind of really know your region too.
So, what is the lifestyle that you're living now? I know that you're opting for more of those long-term stays, and you also mentioned like you plan out the year ahead in like different regions. So, is that still with the pet sitting, like trying to stay at people's houses? Like, what is like where do you stay these days now?
Yeah, so it's still a lot of pet sitting. Although Japan, we actually are super bougie and renting an apartment for once. So for this 2.5 months, yeah, we will like legit pay rent for the first time in 9 years. So it's interesting, but our goal is, and this might seem kind of wacky, but um, with the political climate being kind of tumultuous lately, I am finally pursuing the ability I have as a child of a Japanese national to get my visa to stay there and eventually get permanent residency. So
Nice.
we're thinking, yeah, between that and with the yen being weak against the dollar, maybe this summer we might buy a place in Japan and actually own a place, the first place we own that we actually will live in. So we still will pet sit a bunch. Like I can't, I'm addicted. I can't stop. But we might actually have a home for a little bit, which will be cool. In Japan, I mean, Tokyo's great. I can't complain that if we have to pick a place, it's that place. So
I know you mentioned that
yeah.
you're struggling to identify like the place you want to settle down and stay. And it's like, what are the different like places you're considering, the factors that would influence like where you decide to settle?
It's terrible. Honestly, everywhere we pet sit, I'm constantly like, oh, let's look at the open houses. Let's go to Zillow. Like I constantly am falling in love with places. Like we were in Canyon Lake, Texas, which is like a sleepy kind of resort town between San Antonio and Austin. And we were there and there's like deer running across like, the outside, the porches, and it's beautiful. It's near this man-made lake. So I'm there and like I think we might have even put a bid in on a house. Like I like really need to stop looking, if anything. Like I constantly want places like last year we had a terrible pet sit in Cyprus in the sense that we got fleas and I'm like highly allergic. And anyway, we were like, maybe we should cut down on the pet sitting. And we were going next to Portland. So we're in Portland, we were looking at houses and we bought a house. And then we freaked out after we bought the house and owned it for a few months because we were like, maybe we'll just have it like we'll rent it out. And the folks that we were renting it to had to leave because they eventually bought a house. Anyway, when we lost our tenants, we were like, oh man, now we've got to find new tenants and be like landlords of another property. So we ended up just selling the house 3 months later, which is like a nuts thing to do. So yeah, so I don't know. There's so many places I want to live. Like it's sometimes it's Portland, sometimes it's Seattle, sometimes it's Philadelphia, sometimes it's Tokyo, sometimes it's Berlin. I'm like really troubled by it. So I'm really trying not to look at open houses or real estate because if I do, I think I'll probably end up wanting to buy a place. And that's problematic when you're a pet sitter because you will buy a place that you never stay in, and that's not very sensible. So, we all have our problems, and I'd say that's one of my big problems. So, yeah, but I do look for places that have a climbing gym that I can walk to,
Climbing,
ideally.
rock climbing?
Yeah. Oh, rock climbing. Yeah, I'm addicted. I'm so addicted. So like a climbing gym. Uh, recently, a new thing I would like, but probably won't happen, is I went to play laser tag for the first time in a very long time. And it was so much fun. And I was like, this is a really good workout. Like, there's no way you'll ever get me to sprint and sweat the way I do playing laser tag. And the laser tag place we were at had like a monthly subscription where you pay like $30 a month and you can do unlimited laser tag. And I was like, oh man, between climbing gym and a laser tag facility, I would be in such great shape. And I was like, maybe that's like, I should add that to my, I mean, again, like it's probably not very realistic to get all of these things, but I would like those two things. Uh, we also really like Grocery Outlet, which is like more so on the West Coast, but it's like this grocery
Uh,
store. Have you heard of it? Or
is that like name of a specific store?
it's a chain. It's a
Oh,
chain of grocery stores where they sell like highly discounted, often organic food. And
interesting.
it's like food that's been like discontinued or getting close to expiration. So like that was on the list. Close to an AMC. I'm part of AMC Stubs and I like to go to 3 movies a week. I mean, like, anyway, I would love like the combination of those things, and like a nice culture. So yeah, so it's a little problematic, my list. I can't get all of them, and I really shouldn't even be looking. But yeah, it's always in the back of my mind if I found like that, that like 5 thing, combination. My husband just can't take me to those places because I might want to buy a place that we will then not live in. So
Yeah.
yeah, but long term.
Have you ever gone rock climbing like outside of one of the climbing facilities in the gym, like actually on like a mountain?
Yeah, I have. I have. I don't know how to set things up for that yet, So, I only can climb if I've got really generous friends that are willing to like bring all the equipment and set it up. But I do like outdoor climbing, but I do a lot of indoor climbing just because it's like it's hard to find folks, especially like New York's harder. Los Angeles is great for outdoor climbing. It's so easy to find people, but kind of depends where you are.
Yeah, I think if you remember, you were sending me an email at one point for a meeting time, and I think you accidentally sent me your schedule. And in the schedule, you had like 2 climbs scheduled in there. And I thought you
Oh
were
my
just going
gosh.
on like hikes. Like I thought you were just going on hikes. I didn't know you were actually going on like actual rock climbs.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like really, I was a runner all my life, and then like 4 or 5 years ago, tried rock climbing, and it was just so fun. I was like, whoa, working out can be enjoyable. So yeah, it's like it's changed my life. It's changed how I see my body. As a runner, you're like constantly thinking about your legs, but as a climber, you're like your hands and your arms, right? So like, and just honestly, climbing's like a very all body sport too. So I feel like I've gotten better at like understanding my body as a whole, right? And I think that's like fixed some of my body mentality as well to like appreciate it better. So
And I think one of
yeah.
the beautiful things about a physical exercise that you genuinely love and go fully into is that it really just like helps you get away from things. It helps you get
Yes.
your mind and just kind of just be there in the moment, which I mean, it's amazing when you can find that thing that just clicks. And for me, it's hearing your stories. It looks like you're always involved in trying to do like epic shit, like you're exploring new activities, you're trying to do cool things. And has rock climbing been a thing that's just been there for a while, or is it just part of um like group of activities you're always just trying new things? Like, do you think this group of 5 things
Yeah.
develop like and change with time, or they kind of just being like these are the things that feel good to me?
That's a good question. I like that you could appreciate what I'm saying as someone that like wrestling is your thing,
Yeah.
right? It's like the thing that helps you thrive. And I like agree too. Like I was at the gym yesterday after having a little work stress and I was like, escapism. I'm loving this, right? So yeah, rock climbing honestly like fixes my life every time I do it, like if I have any stress or anything. I just feel like so much better, right? And the endorphins or whatever it is. Rock climbing is also really social, right? Because like you're either climbing with a partner if you're doing like the tall walls, and top roping, or like if you're bouldering, like usually you go with friends or you meet people. So it's great in so many ways. And I agree, like it's just like my thing. Like when I was in high school, I was lucky for a moment I had pole vaulting, and pole vaulting just like clicked with me,
What is
right?
it?
Um, sorry?
You said pole vaulting?
Yeah, pole
What-
vaulting, where you have like the stick and you hoist it into
Oh,
the ground,
like,
and
oh,
like
like
skip over a
while you're
pole.
climbing?
No, just pole
Oh,
vaulting, like track and field kind of sports.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was like my sport that I really liked for a while, but you can't pole vault once you're off a team because like you don't have access to poles or a large mat or anything, right? So
Oh,
I
I know what you
feel
mean now. The one where you like kind of launch yourself up. Yeah. Oh,
exactly.
got it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was like the sport that clicked for me. And then when I like got to college and tried it, and it was like super intense, it was like, oh, just like track practices 3 hours a day, plus like once a week swimming for conditioning, and then all weekend you'll be traveling for meets. It was like, oh my gosh, like how do people go to class and be an athlete? It didn't make sense to me. So I couldn't do it anymore. So I feel like I just ended up doing running because running's kind of like a great fallback, but I don't know if I ever really loved it the way I do other sports. So yeah, when I tried rock climbing, but I don't know, I've never really thought about like, am I seeking out the adventurous stuff? But I guess I am. I like new things. Like I'm constantly looking for new things to do. Like I was just talking to one of my friends after I posted some like, videos I had of I went to Westbeth this weekend and they had like a dance community that was like dancing in all different parts of like this big arts facility. And he's like, "Where do you find these things?" And I'm like, I have to find these things, So I'm like constantly looking for new things. Or the other big thing I feel like that's more constant, or I want to be more constant, is I go to the gathering of the Juggalos if as much as I can every year, which is
What
do
is
you know
that?
what that is?
No, I don't.
It's like a music festival, and it's for fans of the Insane Clown Posse, which is kind of like this older, kind of like gritty rap band. I don't know. But it's like this festival where everyone comes and they're all kind of like misfits, and we all get together and like everything just kind of hangs loose, and there's no judgment, and there's like a ton of support for each other. Anyway, I like being around people, I guess, that are kind of more open-minded in that way, right? And I think maybe whether it's like my friend the biker or whoever I'm meeting, like hitchhiking or climbing, like I think there's within those communities people that are a little bit more of that mindset. So maybe indirectly, I'm finding ways to connect with those people and, share our interests. So yeah, that's a good philosophical question.
I find it interesting how having activities that you just find so much joy in doing can ground you in a way that I think your life just feels a lot more fulfilling, like on a day-to-day basis when you like have those activities you do every week or you do every day, you're always looking forward to. And I don't know why that is because I look at times where I try to do a lot of stuff, whether it be going and wrestling or trying to like try new activities and go hiking and things like that. And I think my life, even when I'm not doing those activities, just feels more fulfilling. Because I guess you're always looking forward to it. And it's also a lot of the activities that do have that social life incorporated with it as well. And there are definitely periods of times where I don't do as much, right? Like I think at my EXP lab, like I wasn't like wrestling at that point. Like even like right now, I'm simply just lifting. Like I'm not wrestling right now, and I can like see the difference in terms of my level of joy and happiness in life when you have those activities that kind of ground you in that way. But have you felt the same thing?
Oh yeah, when I don't have access to a climbing gym, it's kind of sad for me. And that happens. Like we pet sit on Cyprus, which is an island near like off of Greece, and there are a couple climbing gyms, but they would have been like really hard to get to. And I mean, I like walking, but it doesn't give me the joy and grounding I feel that I get otherwise, right? Like I'm like hopeful for you. I'm like, hopefully where you go next, there's like a wrestling club you can engage with like year round, and like kind of have that balance, or, pick up climbing or something. I don't know. But yeah, I agree. Like it kind of can contribute to like not lows, but like it's less fulfilling. I totally think you're right with that. Yeah.
Interesting. What is the craziest experience you've had with pet sitting in terms of like maybe somewhere you stayed where you're just like, this is crazy.
Let's see, craziest pet sit that we did. I'm like cycling through my head right now. Huh.
Any place you've ended up visiting or staying at?
Yeah. I don't know. A lot of them are pretty normal, I would say. I mean, Berlin was interesting because that was like a 3 month pet sit. And I didn't really know what I didn't expect anything, I guess, because I didn't know anything about Germany. I don't speak German. So it was a little mysterious, getting there and like, again, like you are booking a pet sit with someone that you met off the internet and you show up and you're like, hi, I'm here to like live in your place for 3 months. Like, trust me with your loved ones. So yeah, I think for sure that was kind of interesting, like especially when you do like the overseas ones. And it was interesting too because anytime you go overseas, you kind of have to rework your schedule. Like I still, even if I'm overseas, have to work East Coast, West Coast hours. So I think when I was in Berlin, I was maybe doing really early morning
I
hours, I
remember that.
think. Huh?
I remember that. I think that's like when I first started working with you, I think.
Okay. Yeah, my poor students sometimes I'm like, okay, it's gonna be a little funny for a second. Or like even when I was in Israel, to be able to handle East Coast, Pacific Coast kind of like later hours when students are out of school, I had to wake up at like 3 a.m., which is honestly great. I love waking up early. So
What
sometimes
time
I would
would
even wake up at like 2 or 3 and like do a workout and then go work with them.
you,
I don't know.
what time
But
would you
yeah,
sleep to wake up that early?
sorry.
What time would you sleep to wake up that early?
Oh my gosh, so early, like 6.
Were you able to fall
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a great falling asleeper. So
asleep?
yeah, it works out. I'm like an early riser. Like for me, I don't mind doing that. And then my husband's good at doing the other end of it. So like for example, when we're in Japan, I I sleep, I don't know, like 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. And when I wake up at 4 a.m. is when he's done with the workday, essentially. So we
Nice.
kind of like tag team each other, like, okay, bye. And then he goes to sleep. So I think sometimes that's kind of like a fun, strange requirement of it all. But yeah, I don't know. I haven't been too many strange, like, I'm really careful. I've gotten much better at like choosing pet sits where people are really lovely and sane. Like when you first start, you get some people where you're like, something is questionable here. And then you learn to look for red flags. I have a friend that just started pet sitting and she's not good at that yet. So she's constantly telling me horror stories of like the weird people she pet sits for. So I'm hoping she picks up the radar soon. Yeah, so I don't know. I think I've been like so lucky, just like mostly really nice people. We have this one lady even that we like pet sit for regularly. We've done maybe like a year of pet sitting in total for her now. And like I see her as my West Coast mom. So like you build really nice relationships too with people, or some people like you just go back to every year because you're like, I love you and I love your animal. Like anytime you want me, just tell me and I'll put it on my calendar. So
Well,
yeah, it's nice.
when you're
Yeah.
working the crazy hours when you're traveling to Berlin or Israel, what does the rest of your day kind of look like? Like, what is the lifestyle you live? So I'm assuming you wake up like 3, like you do your work for the first, I don't know, maybe 8 or
Yeah.
10. What do you do for the rest of the day?
Oh, explore. As you can probably guess. Um, like for example, when we're in Berlin, I mean, Berlin is cool because they have like this rock climbing gym consortium where they're like, I don't know, 10 gyms that you can go to on one pass. So we tried all of the gyms. I'm really into checking out malls. Like, I'm like really, I guess I grew up like going to the mall all the time as a high schooler. And I know malls are dying now. So I'm always like trying to see like the health of malls in an area. So like everywhere we go, like one of the first things we'll do, I'll be like, okay, let's pinpoint all of the malls and go to them. And I feel like malls are good too, because like they're a place to kind of notice people. Like I think it's like, you were saying kind of like observing culture. I feel like different areas have different kinds of people at their mall. So yeah, so malls are great. I mean, the usual like museums. You look at Atlas Obscura, see if there's anything kind of interesting going on. And lots of art classes. I'm someone that like if I'm in a place where the library offers crafting events, I will like I will like go through the schedule for like months in advance and like pre-book everything Like I don't think most people would think of this, but Orlando has like the best crafting classes at their library. They have like these crazy maker spaces and like really highly functioning, highly educated like crafters that will come and teach you how to, for example, make like cosplay equipment, which like I don't know, like, do I need to make a cosplay mask? Like, no. Am I going to? Because they offer it? Like, yeah, 100%. I'm going to go to like a multi-series, like cosplay series and learn to make a mask out of like PVC? So I
Well,
don't know. So those are things I look for.
how did you navigate into working in the college counseling department? Like I think you worked for a school before you started doing freelance work. So how did you navigate
Yeah.
with that occupation?
So again, unintentional, like everything in my life is so unintentional. But when I was at the University of Pennsylvania as a student, I like worked. I took like every job I could because I was like, I'm graduating with no debt. Like I was like almost full pay, but still had to cover my housing. And I was like, you know what? Any job that comes up, I will take it. So over winter break, like pretty much like during like Christmas vacation, and this is kind of sad. I think everyone else was like, I'm gonna like take the break off and have a good time and see my family. And like I was like one of the few sad students that was like, ooh, there's a possibility to work over break. Like sign me up. And it was in the admissions office sorting applications, right? So you're like, back then it was paper applications. So you'd get stacks and like sort them by different information that you were given by the admissions officers. And I liked it so much. I stayed with the admissions office. I ended up doing like tours for them, which I love. I'm like such a ham. I love doing like any kind of tours. Like I used to be a New York City financial district tour guide. Anyway, so enjoyed doing that. And then when I graduated, because I graduated a semester early, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. So I'll just stay here and keep working. So kept working at the admissions office and then eventually left. Did some test prep related stuff for a while, taught, and I don't know, it's weird, but like once you've been in admissions, it kind of just like pulls you back, to the point where I was doing, like I said, like the kindergarten admissions tutoring, and as our company grew, it ended up doing kind of like K through 12 admissions. And then beyond that, there were families that were like, oh, we actually need college admissions, right? So eventually it just kind of evolved. And I really like high schoolers you know you're out of high school essentially at this point, but like yourself included, right? Like high schoolers are like the best, I feel, population ever to work with. Like you guys have like all of like your hopes and dreams, and like you like have like the enthusiasm and you're curious, and like I feel I'm constantly learning from my high schoolers. Like I learned so much from you actually, like when you're like going through that progress of like finding like value sets and like, mentorships and things like that, where I'm just like, that is so thoughtful, and I'm like, high schoolers can think like, it's like very mature. So like constantly different students are teaching me different ways of thinking. And, like the first time I learned about CRISPR was through a high school student, like things like that constantly where I'm like, huh, I had no idea, like, for example, if one of my students right now, that there's like a food allergy council for high schoolers to join. Anyway, so it's good. I like this job because it keeps things really fresh, in the sense that I have to do a lot of research to do my job, but I'm also like inspired by what my students are doing. So it keeps me, as someone that like is always seeking something new, it keeps me fulfilled in a way that other jobs have not. So yeah, so it's kind of lucky that I found this.
Yeah, another lesson I can derive from your life story is that you don't always have to know where you're going. I think a lot of people that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, especially in high school level, you'll see a lot of people that are stressed about, I need to know every single thing about my life planned out. I need to know exactly the career I want from the minute I'm stepping into high school, and I need to plan out everything to make sure I'm following the blueprint. But I don't think you really you didn't really plan out that you'd be here at this spot here in 2024 at all, because it's really just going out each day and leaning into what you think is correct and trying to stay away from like what doesn't feel good, and you just make those decisions every day, and it leads to the perfect outcome wherever that might be. And I don't think there is a perfect outcome. I think wherever your life decisions lead you to is the perfect outcome.
I agree. I agree. There's so much like trusting your values and intentions and being willing to take risks, because I think a lot of my life I really sought to be normal, like I have a very weird family situation, like very latchkey kid. I grew up in like Purple, Pennsylvania, where like there are things about my family that like made me for sure very different from everyone else. And I like tried to obscure or not talk about those things. So I think when I got to university, and university is great because it's such like a mixing pot, a melting pot of students in the sense that like you kind of can find what suits you, right? And explore that. Like I think there's a lot of freedom that you don't get necessarily because you don't choose where you grow up, right? Versus like you kind of choose where you go to school and who you're around. So I feel like that really helped me with like coming to terms with my identity and like being able to explore stuff that I authentically was interested in. And then it took some more time because I think like even coming to New York City, I used to be at one point a household manager for like exceptionally wealthy, put together families. And like as a result, had to like dress like very nicely, like be very organized, like everything to a T. And I think eventually when I was like, you know what, I can't follow rules anymore. I think that's when I learned to kind of grasp the things that like actually matter to me. But it took a long time, but it did start to come in, I think, around like undergrad year. Um, so yeah, I wish everyone could like discover like what works for them authentically early, but that's just not life, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's hard to even find
So
what that is because there's so much noise pulling you away from
yes.
what that authentic self is. And when you grow up with so many like information overload, people telling you how the way the world works and how you should be acting, what you should be doing. I don't think there's anyone that really exists who I would classify as normal. I think everyone has peculiarities that make them unique as a person. It's just that we think that we should change the way we act to conform because I think it's just hardwired into our DNA. Like to survive, we need to be part of a group. And because we need
Yes.
to be part of a group, we think that we need to act like how other people want us to act. But because of that, it's really hard to act in an individual way because it's hard to even define like what does that mean to act in an individual way. Like even when you think that you're doing something for yourself, you keep digging further and further into the reason why you did that. It could just be because you think that's the way you should act. And it's so hard to really access that. But it's amazing that you were able to discover that through college.
Yeah, yeah, that's like again, you're mature beyond your years, the stuff you say. But yeah, I agree. Like, it's definitely tough because you're right. There is so much noise. I feel weird sometimes being an admissions consultant because occasionally I get students where it's like they clearly don't want to go to university, at least right now. Like I had a student that like clearly wanted to become a chef. And I'm like, well, at least find universities where you have culinary, like options, right? Where you can still like be parts of those clubs and take classes. But yeah, it's hard though, because everyone's like, go to college, you should go to college. And sometimes I'm like, you know what, for you, I think you kind of know what you want and it doesn't involve anyway. So it's a weird position. I feel like a lot of people in college admissions kind of feel that way too. Or sometimes I wonder, I'm like, if people hadn't told me I should go to university, I would have gone to vocational school and become a welder. And that would have been such a cool job. I mean, I'm like very happy like with what happened. I love my life and all of that, but you still kind of have these alternate pathways of like, what if I earlier had the guts not to do what people told me to do? Because like the reality is like you're right, like you'll find your way, right? You might fall on your face a bunch, but like you'll find your way, right? Or I think sometimes when I was in high school, this kid asked me on a date to um, watch him do like backyard wrestling, where like him and a bunch of friends had a ring and they just put like barbed wire and glass all over it and wrestled each other. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, this is like the craziest first date I've ever been. Like he left and he was like bleeding. He was like, what did you think? And I remember at the time I was like, that's weird. And now I'm like a big pro wrestling fan. And I wish I had understood it back then, But I think I was like too normed, to like appreciate how cool kind of what he was doing was,
Yeah,
you
interesting.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's hard. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have, right? I'm sure like both of us are kind of like, how do we give the advice for people to find what they authentically like? It's super hard to do that.
Yeah.
right? When we're programmed. So,
I think just taking breaks from everything helps. Like trying to step away from things in a way. Because
mhm,
I think if you're always involved in doing things, it's a great way to live. But I think occasionally taking time to just step away. I think for you, like changing environments can maybe reveal that a lot because then you're
yes.
immediately just pulled out of the bubble you're living in over and over and over again. And I think that could help you to maybe look at what stays despite everything around you changing because I'm sure the environment shapes you a lot of who you become as a person, whether that just be your friend group or the culture you live in, the place you live in. But I mean, I'm curious, like maybe the energy of adventurism has stuck with you despite the fact that you've constantly shifted environments and maybe even beyond that. There's maybe certain things you see in yourself or the things you believe, the way you act that just haven't been able to change despite the number of places you've been to, the number of environments you've lived in. So maybe just taking time away from your day-to-day life can help with that as well.
Mhm. I agree. I think so. Just even like, hearing folks after they go on vacation for a week or two, they come back and they're like, that was a reset, and like it's very much often what they needed, right? Or sometimes people go on vacation, they're like, I'm quitting my job. I'm moving to, Lisbon or something, right? So, uh, yeah, but it's hard. It's like one of those things where like I also have to keep in mind it's like a privilege, that I can do that, right? I'm like, I can't expect that for other people either. But I think it is really healthy. Like I always thought about that. Like I taught in Newark for a bit, and like in Newark, a lot of the students I taught kind of grew up on like, what we called like a 5 by 5 block radius, where like all of their lives till they were 18, it was like their exposure was just that 5 by 5 block. And it definitely affected like their aspirations or how they saw the world, and it's like, that's why I think programs that are kind of like outward bound are really good to get those kids to see other places and interact with other people. I feel the exposure is really good for like building empathy and like understanding situations better. Like constantly, I'm a big fan of Florida. Sometimes my friends in the Northeast are like, Florida? How can you go to Florida? Like, do you see what DeSantis is doing? And I'm like, I understand, but like parts of Florida are actually like really like moderate, liberal, mixed, etc. Orlando especially, I think, is like pretty liberal. So I think it's like, unless you actually go to a place, it's so easy to have assumptions, right? Versus if you go and you're like, oh no, this is the reality of it, right? Or like even Canyon Lake, Texas, like tons of, signs for XYZ political candidate, but the signs didn't dictate who the people were either, like you can't judge people based off of affiliations. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to learn exactly from traveling.
Yeah, and it's also you can't just categorize an entire state in just one way, right? It's not like depending how big a state is, like it's hard to say, oh,
Absolutely.
everyone in the state acts in this particular way. Like as you mentioned, like you literally go and drive for 30 minutes and you can almost feel like you're in a different place based on the suburb you're in or the town you're in or the part of the state you're in. So, I mean, it's crazy how big the world is and how much we really have access to. I think more than ever with the internet, we can really gain like insight into how diverse and strange the world really is. Because as you mentioned, the 5 by 5 block that a lot of people live in, I think for most of history, even if it's not a 5 by 5 block, we're living in a very small, secluded area where people all pursue the same kind of occupation and live in the same kind of way. But now that we have the internet, even if everyone around us is living in this kind of way, we can look online and see, wait, what? How is he living that kind of lifestyle? Or how is she doing this? And I think the internet has really opened people's eyes. So I think that's why we see so many people today just trying to go against the norm and explore. And as you said,
Yes.
they'll face plant 100 times, but I think that's what really develops our character to be versatile and develop even more and mature more. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting place you've come to in the world.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree for sure. The internet, like there's just so many people out there doing adventurous things, that you're like, oh, if they can do that, maybe this is real for me, like I think we've met a lot of people that have always been like, ooh, I want to travel a bunch. And we've inspired international pet sitters because of our contact with them. And that's like super cool. I'm like, you totally can live a cheaper, more sustainable lifestyle, right? Like it is possible. I think a lot of us just need the exposure, to realize what works for us.
100%. Um, when you applied for UPenn, like, how was that looking like for you back when you were in high school? I know, like, these days it's probably a lot different than from when you were applying for colleges. And
Oh yeah.
Did you only apply there? Like, did you, I mean, in terms of like how many schools did you apply to? Like, what did the school market kind of look like back there?
Yeah, so back then, it's like very common to a lot of people applied to like 3 or 5 schools, which obviously is not so much the case today. I applied to maybe like 7. I know from what I can remember, Drexel, Penn, Slippery Rock, I think, in Pennsylvania, like a state school. Um, did I say Roger Williams, Georgetown, George Washington, and Penn? So yeah, I think about like 7 schools. Um, and what was confusing for me was when I was in high school, I wanted to be a probation officer. I wanted to work in prisons. That was my goal. So I like had it in my head already. I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to go to Roger Williams because they have criminal justice. And then, I didn't know enough about what was going to be my fate, but like when Penn pretty much is like, come here and we'll pay pretty much for everything, I was like, well,
Yeah.
they don't have criminal justice. I guess I'll go to Penn, which was like, it's like a very silly thing to be like, oh, I guess I'll go there. But that's like what my attitude was a little bit. I was like kind of a jerk. Uh, but they had a psych major and I was like, oh, do psych. And, luckily I figured other things out that I wanted to do with that. Um, but yeah, it was different back then. I mean, it still was like stressful for people, of course, like to apply to schools and not get in their dream school. But now students are like applying, like if you're applying to competitive, highly selective schools, like 20 schools, sometimes more. And that's like so many essays, and so many essays to write and so many applications. And like it just wasn't like that. Like back then, gosh, like you could get into like Penn with like a 1400, even 1300s. Like really wasn't a big deal. So I don't know. It's like it's sad for me, but I also understand like it's harder because more people are applying to these schools, right? So, and I think it's because more people feel empowered to. So I'm like hopefully seeing it as like a good thing in some ways. I don't know. When you work in this field, it's hard not to have complex feelings about in these schools and how like nuts so it's gotten to get into them. I would like high schoolers to be able to live more normal lives. Like I think the biggest change is like extracurriculars are like on steroids now. Back then, like I did sports, I was on student council, I was like the newspaper editor, but I did those things purely because, like, as you know, I'm like a busybody, I'm like, I want my hands in everything, so like all of that, like I never did anything because I was like, I need this to get into college, versus I feel a lot of high schoolers now have this mentality of like, I've got to do a lot of things to get into college. And it ideally shouldn't be that way. It should be like you pursuing stuff because you want to, you
Yeah.
know? So,
It's an interesting place. Like I think I found myself in both boats at different times, and I think I found a decent middle ground where I would say a lot of the activities I do out of enjoyment, like whether it be sports or the podcast, like those are activities I do for myself. But at the same time, like,
yes.
you kind of feel like, oh, I should be doing this as well. Like I should be joining this club,
Oh,
and you kind of do them when you don't really want to. And I think it can still be okay if you're living in that middle ground, and it allows you to explore a little bit more, so you can at least find what clicks. But there are definitely a lot of people that are just doing something that they completely just don't want to do, which I think is a scary place to be. But at the same time, like I don't feel terribly because I think at the same time, like they will live their life and make their own decisions and end up in a place that ends up um where they end up
that's a
becoming
good point.
as well. So
Yeah, like you're great. Like you're like an authentic student, right? And I get some students that are like, they're just purely authentic. They're doing things because like they're driven by them. And even though like you do bring up a good point that like even my students that are doing things because it's good for college end up because they feel they have to, like often doing like a service activity. And then they're like exposed to people they never naturally would have been inclined to do, right? Like maybe they never would have volunteered at a shelter. Maybe they never would have like worked with veterans, but because they felt they had to, they discovered like a cause that actually speaks to them. So in some ways it's good. The pressure that like students feel to have to do things is sad for me, like I know I went to like a very not very good high school where like I essentially didn't have homework ever, so it's like to hear my students sometimes are like up to 2 a.m. and like sleeping 4 hours to like make their life work for them. I'm like, that's not what it's supposed to be, like there is a line. So that stuff makes me nervous, but
I
Yeah.
think also partly because as a culture in the world, we prioritize efficiency over
Oh
anything,
yeah.
which is why we justify giving large amounts of schoolwork, not because it's helping us learn better, but just because it trained us to work in an efficient manner, which I don't think it's any like individual person to decide like this is pressing some red button, like this is how we're gonna do it. But I think groups can be really interesting in terms of like how they operate together. Like it's
Yes.
not like any one individual person has such negative views about the world, but when people are interacting with each other and they're trying to do something that helps everyone succeed, we'll end up prioritizing things like efficiency because efficiency is supposed to make more money, which is supposed to make you more happy. But we sacrifice our state of being and happiness for what's supposed to get it, which ends up putting us in a weird spot.
I agree. I agree. You can't just chase like the next step, you know? And it's tempting to, right? Because like especially having lived in New York City 10 years, your friends are all kind of moving up, right? You're constantly like, oh, now you work for the DA, right? Or you make $500,000 a year and you just bought like your first house in New York City, which is nuts, or whatever it is, right? It's hard not to kind of like be pulled into that, right? But like I agree, like what you've been saying throughout, like you need that time to step back and like recognize like, is this my goal? Is this actually going to benefit me? Or am I just like following kind of the ropes, like so yeah, it's hard to separate that, but it's like everyone needs that. And sometimes like again, like you need the face plants to recognize it, right? Like for me, I was doing household manager work until COVID hit and was, still doing college admissions consulting on the side. And when that happened, and a lot of people had this happen, like had recognitions where they're like, you know what? I think my life has to change. And that's when I switched like full time into college admissions. And, like you need these kind of disruptions, to start over, right? Or like I needed to break up with my boyfriend after buying a condo with him, a month later and have that stress in my life. Because if I hadn't, I never would have begun pet sitting. And then, all of the chaos of my life would never have started. So, I agree. Like, yeah. And I think that's like, I don't know how many high schoolers are going to listen to this, but um, I know it doesn't make sense now, but your failures will really help you and shape you, like you were saying. So they're a good thing.
And when I reflect on like the school system and the train tracks of success, like I'm not totally opposed to them either. I think that it's good to have them because otherwise the alternative would be that considering how easy it is to live a comfortable lifestyle, I don't think people
Mhm.
will ever develop the discipline and the work ethic they need in order to pursue what they really want to do without that established. So like
It's true.
even though maybe the things I might have studied at some points I might believe, oh, I don't actually want to learn this thing and wasting my time. I think that it's helped me to develop skills that I can apply to other pursuits that have helped me to achieve those things as well. I think as long as you're a witness of the train tracks and you're at some point able to find that clarity like of what you want versus what the system is putting you in, then you could still take away those skills you develop. Like I think we both would look back at life in terms of failures and think that regret is kind of pointless because everything's developed you in some way. And I think the school system is a part of that. Like I think it allows kids to really develop the values and skills you need to go and pursue something else as well in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I think it gives like a really good structure for most students. And then there's like, the handful. I mean, you go to a school where I think you have kind of like these more like aligned students, right? In terms of like aiming for academic excellence. Um, I married someone that was like the opposite in the sense that like he would go to school and essentially like not do his homework and negotiate with his teachers that if he got A's on tests, could he just get an A in the class? And somehow he convinced them to do this. And like he was like your absolute slacker, like always knew he wanted to go into film. He went to NYU for a semester. He got in. I don't know how you get into NYU when you have kind of so great he probably, I don't think teachers had like, I don't know. Anyway, I don't know how he got into NYU, but he did. And he almost used NYU just as a way to get his foot into New York City without his parents just thinking he was running away. And then like immediately quit NYU and like went into working in film, So it's like there are these like kind of occasional students where they're like, I want to be an actor, like what's school going to do for me, right? Or like my chef student, like I don't need this. I could just start apprenticing, right? So I felt very lucky that like at my high school, we had our high school, and then across the street was a vocational school. So students could choose to spend half their day at vocational school and like learn a trade. And I was like, I'm like really glad not everyone felt like they had to go to college, you know? So that's the thing. I want everyone to have like options, I guess, is and like feel empowered to pursue whichever option. You know, like long term, I'd like to see more of that, like be part of what high schools tell students. So we'll see. Hopefully, I feel like it's going in that direction.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with me today. I know for the last few years, the conversation has always been focused on me, but I'm glad you're finally able to have one where the show is on you.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's one of those things where like I try not to weird my students out with like the variety of my life, right? Some students figure out they're like, "Oh, you have a new animal every time." Like what's going on? All right? But yeah, yeah. And then that's usually they usually I really enjoy that. But every now and then I get a parent that's like they look up and they find the New York Post article and
Yeah,
they're like, "What is this person?"
yeah.
You know? So
I
I'm
think
like, you could be a legitimate person and do weird things. It's
I think
possible.
we definitely recommend your services to different people, and I think one of them reached out to us and told us he had some like strange background, and we didn't know what to think about that. So I think I've heard about the rumor for some time and before we sent the article, but yeah, it's definitely
Yeah.
like the first thing we jump to, which I mean it's not their fault completely, but I think when you actually have a conversation, you learn about it.
I am not for everyone. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I'm very good at my job, but like if you want someone a bit more staid and like kind of more normal, that won't be me. Um, but
Luckily, I think
but
our
hopefully, yeah, yeah. I feel like the uniqueness is good with admissions because of the essays and things. So usually it's a plus.
luckily I think our energies have matched quite well, so it's worked out fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And just seeing your growth, oh my gosh, you know, like some of my students are kind of steady, you know, but like you've just like been like this throughout your career, which is
Thank you.
cool. Yeah. Like you're gonna be a totally grown person by the time you're out of college. You're gonna be like functioning like you're 40, you know, which is gonna be wild.
I
So
really appreciate it.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start doing a tradition kind of, which I haven't done yet, but I'm kind of just experimenting with it. But I want to ask each person I podcast from now on, what is something you've always wanted to do but never found the time to?
Oh man.
I think it's
That's a
interesting we're starting with
hard
it's
question.
interesting we're starting with you because you look like someone who always does what you wanted to do. But yeah, I was curious.
I think you're right that I generally do what I want to do. Um, Trying to think if there are any skills I've been wanting to learn that I haven't. Oh, I don't know if I have any skills. Gosh, yeah, I don't know. I kind of just am very impulsive and like do what I want. I would, one thing that I've like been trying to do and trying to be better about is I went to my first gathering of the Juggalos like 5 years ago before COVID and I loved it. And I haven't been back because usually a lot of like the summers I'm away overseas. But this summer it worked out that I can actually go. And like that's something I want to like be more intentional about making time for the communities I want to be a part of, you know? Like I can't just like make excuses. It's like, no, 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 no. You got to just like cut that time out for your schedule and pursue that, right? Even if it costs money because of the travel or whatever it is, like I'm gonna set those things aside and just like make it a tradition. So maybe that's part of it is almost like for someone like me, I need to learn how to integrate tradition into my life to be more like I think genuinely involved with the communities I want to be involved in.
Okay, interesting. The reason I asked this, I'm thinking that if I make a list of like what is one thing that each person wanted to do that they haven't found the time to, I want to see if I can do as many of those things as I can.
Oh, you should totally go to a gathering of the Juggalos. You should
So how do you
watch
spell
some
juggalos?
videos about it first to
Yeah.
be prepared.
Okay, how do you spell juggalos? This is J-U-G.
It's Juggalos.
A-L-O-S. Perfect. That's
Yeah, you're gonna watch it and you're gonna be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this.
we'll see.
But
We'll see.
either way, some go to some festival. Festivals are like so fun. Have you gone to a music festival, like a camping one
No,
yet, or?
I don't think so. But go to
Okay,
something.
they're fun. They're so fun. I used to work at Bonnaroo, and that was like my kind of into festivals. It's
Where's
you
Baruah?
won't sleep. In Tennessee.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So check some out. Go maybe not the Juggalos if that's not your cup of tea, but go to some camping festival. They're super
Camping
fun.
festival. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna head to my class that's starting in 5 minutes.
Oh,
So
go.
I'll go.
Thank you for your
And
time.
thank you as well. We'll stay in touch for sure. I think my sister's also ready to start her college counseling as well. So
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to meet her. All right, we'll see you later. Have fun in class.
have a good one.
If you enjoyed that episode, then you're gonna love this episode right here. Make sure you click here to watch that video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.